boom, boom, boom go the drums. We all hear about it. An earthquake in North Africa, a Hollywood star gets drunk, away go the drums again. I use the word tribal. It is probably the key word of this whole half hour.
It is my pleasure to welcome you here for the 5th edition of McLuminations. It's actually the 5th edition here in this building. I understand there have been 7 McLuminations events in total. I don't want to get that figure wrong, that's very important. This whole concept of McLuminations was actually launched by Baruch Gottlieb, who's with us here today. He launched the whole thing back in 2011, so it's great that Baruch is able to join us for this event here. The theme for today is Quest for Identity in the Global Village, and we're very pleased that we'll be able to use some of the video materials that we have in our McLuhan archive to provoke what we hope will be a very lively discussion. You may or may not have had a chance to visit this space before. So this is the Marshall McLuhan Salon, which is actually unique in all of our Canadian embassies all over the world. It's an interactive learning facility where we teach school groups, people of all ages, about everything having to do with Canada. But one thing that's great about this facility is that it is actually home to the world's largest collection of McLuhan materials outside of Canada, so that's rather unique. And one thing I would like to stress is that we have hours for the public on Fridays. So if after today's discussion you say, I really want to sink my teeth into all of that McLuhan material, then please don't hesitate to come back on a Friday sometime, because then we would be pleased to share with you all of the video material, the documents that we have. It really is quite extensive. So we do host regular events here on McLuhan, and previous discussions have focused on themes such as the artist's understanding of infrastructure critique and the media practice behind McLuhan's media theory. And we're very pleased to welcome you all today, and we hope that this is a series of discussions that, of course, will continue into the future. This is the second year in a row that Mark Wolf has brought students from the University of Calgary to this Marshall McLuhan Salon, and we're very happy to support a developing Canadian-German exchange on the subject of Marshall McLuhan here in Berlin. So in the past, our partnership involved the University of Applied Sciences, and this year we're very pleased to be working with the Freie Universität here in Berlin, where I understand there was a joint seminar on McLuhan that took place yesterday, which perhaps some of you already participated in. I would like to welcome our panelists today, our 2 panelists, so Elfriede Fürstich, welcome, and Mr. Mark Wolf, whom I already mentioned, of course. So it's also important to mention everybody who played a key role in organizing an event like this. We're happy that so many of you turned out, that something like this takes quite a bit of groundwork, legwork in order to come together. So I would like to thank Steffi Winke for bringing together today's speakers, for identifying the subject, and for selecting the archive materials that will be used in today's discussion. And of course, thank you again to Baruch for his role in launching this whole concept. We're very happy that you're our driving force for the McLuminations series. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't thank my colleague Andrea Bögner, who plays a key role in all of these McLuhan-themed events. She brings her passion for this subject to all of these events that we organize here at the embassy. So on that note, I will be quiet, but I welcome you all once again, and hope you have a very interesting discussion. Welcome to our embassy, and schönen Tag noch. Bonne journée, bonne fin d'après-midi. Thank you.
Okay, hi, my name is Baruch. I don't think we'll probably need to use the mic right away. Maybe we're going to use it later. Everybody can hear me okay? Mm-hmm. All right, well, yeah, great pleasure. Thanks a lot, Ben, for the intros, and thanks, Andrea, of course. Without you, this would not happen, and Steffi. Well, I get to introduce Steffi. Let me introduce Steffi first. Steffi's doctoral candidate and visiting lecturer at the Institute for Media and Communication Studies at the Freie Universität. I knew that. And research fellow at the Wilhelm Flusser Archive, where we occasionally hang out. Wilhelm Flusser, another very interesting media theorist. Maybe some of you know about his work. There's an archive here. The hours are on Thursday. It's just down the street from here, Potsdamer Straße go down. It's at the UDK, the University of Arts in Grünewaldstraße. The Wilhelm Flusser Archive. It's really worth visiting. Steffi, well, I mean, Steffi is integral to McLuminations since almost the beginning, and now I can't imagine McLuminations without Steffi. So what does this mean? Anyway, she participated in many. Oh yeah, right. We through various processes, we generated some what we call in German Begleitmaterial, which is kind of like ancillary material, associated material for the archival clips that are in the archive here. So the idea with McLuminations was to generate like discussion around, well, one of the ideas around the clips that we have here, and like contextualize those old clips with contemporary dialogue. So from those dialogues that were generated, we produced a kind of a new element for the archive here, which is so kind of illuminated clip archive, mini clips with a little bit of contextual text, which was released last year. Andrea worked very intensively on it as well, and Steffi, most of everybody. And so that we are very proud, and that's built into the system here now. So you can, that's only with on those funny like frog type display things. How about you? Okay. That's it. And I'll introduce. Do you want to switch? You want to introduce me now?
Yeah.
Okay, and then we'll introduce the other.
So you already know that Baruch Gottlieb is connected to the Wilhelm Flusser Archive, an honorary fellow, I read. Yeah,
I guess the
officially.
honor's all mine.
He's an artist researcher in residence at the, I have to read it, Institute for Time-Based Media.
Yes.
And you are a lecturer now at the Universität der Künste at the UDK.
Yeah.
And you finished your PhD last year, so
Right.
you're bringing out a new book
That's
called?
A political economy of the smallest things.
Okay.
Which is about the status of images at the subatomic level.
So we are both into McLuhan and into Flusser, you already know it. And what's interesting too, and I have to mention it, you are now curating the upcoming Flusser and the Arts exhibition, who will be launched in August in Karlsruhe at the ZKM.
And coming to Berlin in November at the ADK, at the Akademie der Künste.
Okay.
Good. Yes. That's for us. Yes.
Yeah.
One back. Very good. Good job. So our honored guests today. I have the honor to introduce Dr. Wolf. Dr. Wolf is, many of you know, I guess, adjunct assistant professor, sessional instructor, Department of Communications, Media and Film of the University of Calgary, and co-director of the Center for Information and Communication at the Van Horn Institute
In Calgary.
in Calgary. We have a Van Horn Street in Montreal.
Yes.
That's,
That one lives
and his master's thesis was on the phenomenology of virtual reality. We got to talk about a bit last year. And you are going to be a visiting researcher at the KIT,
Yes.
Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, where Wilhelm Flusser also worked on a project on an early hypertext. When it was called the Kernforschungsinstitut Karlsruhe, the nuclear Center for Nuclear Physics Research. Now they changed the name. It's a little bit more updated. Philosophical and practical study of the technology-society interface. We won't get a chance to, we'll get a chance maybe after to talk about what that means.
Yes.
Okay, and I have the honor to introduce Professor Elfriede Fürssich, who is a visiting professor at the Freie Universität at the Institute for Media and Communication Studies, and has been, or still is, into the topic of media and the representation of others. And her current research examines the creation of a participatory new kind of public sphere. And I hope we can talk about this later too. So
I'll talk about the format a little bit.
Please.
So McLuminations, besides trying to create contextual materials for what we have in the archive, it's also an experimental approach whereby we confront the coldness of the media. I don't know if you ever heard of McLuhan's concept of hot and cold media, if it resonates with you. But one of the things that McLuhan said, that in a cold media like video, the most interesting thing is to see people talking with each other and learning from each other. And this kind of process is like a very good media. So through that, we kind of warm up the cold media of television. So this is what we're trying to do here, and we try to warm up McLuhan from his storage place in the computer. So, the idea is that we play clips, and then we discuss things that resonate for us in the clips. And it's very important to also keep in mind that we can play the clips again or play parts of the clips again. So like if there's anything that was not clear, we want to make sure we heard him correctly, we could just rub him back. We kind of scrub McLuhan back and forth and remix McLuhan as we discuss him. So that's basically the concept. We have a few clips lined up, and they kind of form the structure of the discussions.
But still, we are open to jump over,
Yes.
leave something out and everything. And the sketch of the topic, as you heard and read, is the quest for identity in the global village. And the idea, I mean, this is no strict red line for our discussion, but the background idea was to discuss on these clips McLuhan talking about the global village, not only as a positive idea for the future with harmony, but at the same time being very aggressive, but to then fostering dialogue and interchanging positions, perspectives, and so on. So this is the global village theme, and then he often mentions that the global village deprives people of their private identity, that we lose our individualism and kind of merge with other identities or with group identities. So this is the outline or the sketch for our discussion perhaps, but we are very open, so if you have thoughts to say, please put it into the discussion.
Yes, we are very open to interruptions of all kinds. Yes, the global village, as you may have seen, is a kind of ambiguous expression in McLuhan, and even though we, in a lot of his writings, we do lose our identity, our Enlightenment period kind of autonomousness. There's like all worlds of new kinds of creativities that are unleashed through this loss of identity, but we don't get to own them. Should we go for the first clip?
Yes. So this is the first clip is a very early clip, a kind of a treasure of the archive. This clip is from the CBC, it's even online, and it's from 1960. Perhaps we just start. It's a kind of introduction into the whole global village identity question.
Yeah, CBC Media Archive, just go CBC Archive McLuhan on Google and you get all those clips.
With me now is Marshall McLuhan. Well, Marshall, you've done a considerable amount of writing about media. What does this all mean, the book world that we had and the electronic world we have? Well, I think the best distinction, Alan, might be found in the phrase "with it." You know how we speak of being with it, meaning we've understood completely, we've got the message, as it were, in every way possible. But in the older book or print culture, people were not with it, and they were away from it by themselves with their own private point of view. Now, you have no point of view when you're with it because you accept the thing totally. And we're with it because these new media of ours, the one you talked about in the appliance store, have made our world into a single unit. The world is now like a continually sounding tribal drum, where everybody gets the message all the time, a princess gets married in England, and boom, boom, boom go the drums. We all hear about it. An earthquake in North Africa, a Hollywood star gets drunk, away go the drums again. I use the word tribal. It's probably the key word of this whole half hour.
Why, Marshall, do you use the word tribal? Why this?
Well, I think you'll find everything we observed tonight about the media points in the direction of tribal man and away from individual man.
By individual man, I assume that you're referring to John's literary man.
Yes, and tribal man is the man created by the new electronic medium.
So that this would be the basic change we spoke of at the beginning.
Yes, we're retribalizing. Involuntarily, we're getting rid of individualism. We're in the process of making a tribe. For just as books and their private point of view are being replaced by the new medium, so the concepts which underlie our actions, our social life, are changing. We are no longer so concerned with self-definition, with finding our own individual way. We're more concerned with what the group knows, of feeling as it does, of acting with it, not apart from it.
So there was a lot in there. For example, the connection between global village and the tribe. I think he doesn't even use global village in here.
It's not there.
He's only going for the word tribe and retribalizing. So that might open perhaps some questions about the global village, or your understanding about the global village, or your understanding about the tribe, or perhaps understanding it as a swarm. Using a current word or a word, a catchphrase for current studies.
I think what's fascinating about this clip is that you mentioned this news, right, that travel around the globe, and it's the same kind of news we have today, right? Nothing has really changed. So maybe they're a little bit faster than ever before, but they're still the same kind of news. And he does describe that very nicely, that it keeps us busy, right? Much busier than anything else, just following these kinds of probably useless news. So that I think is a really, really important observation. In general, I have always a problem with the fact that he seems to be very negative about tribes, right? That he thinks it's a problematic connection or way of organizing your life. I think there are both ways. I mean, and I would argue, as opposed to McLuhan, that we're always tribal and we're always alienated at the same time, and we kind of switch between those positions. So I can live with the fact that once in a while we are tribal. It's also good for us. It's not just bad for us.
I think it's also interesting the word tribe takes on a number of connotations in the Canadian context. There's one, the obvious one, of course, is in the context of First Nations people, and the extent to which they might take some umbrage at our, adopting tribal in such a, one might say, almost cavalier way, in the sense that McLuhan perhaps means it, being always playful, being always paradoxical to some extent in his work. But so there's that aspect, and I'm not sure. And yet, on the other hand, Canada, it has been argued by some important people like John Ralston Saul, is inherently tribal in the sense that it's inherently a First Nations country. That the first settlers in Canada, the way they even survived the first winters, the brutal winters, and I think we brought some of it with us from Canada to Berlin this year, and I apologize for that. But where some of the first settlers in Canada were able to survive at all by mixing with, by living with Métis with the First Nations people, and that we have a biological bond, and not as well as a cultural bond to First Nations people, and so we might be tribal in that sense. That's another interesting contrast. But the other interesting one, and then I'll stop talking for a minute, is the whole French-English question, and to what extent do we feel tribal in a single comprehensive way? Even just within the bounds of Canada, particularly when McLuhan often celebrates the fact that Canada was progressive and remains progressive in actually instituting policies that kind of help keep us apart while at the same time integrating us. And even talks about French and English Canada being each other's environment, each other's playing off, creating kind of a super environment within which there's always this natural division.
Yes.
Yeah, I find it very interesting here in Germany, and I read somewhere that the radio actually helped or was a big influence in these countries being nationalist again. Like we see for the Nazis, they had all these radios for the people, and then they become a tribe. It's like the electronic medium. Also, he also talks a lot about the black population in America being turned on by the electronic medium. So that's also something that for me was very new from McLuhan, how he talks about the environment of the electricity turning on these tribes, and at the same time creating the global village. So after.
Yeah, I think there's a few interesting points there. Like for one, the notion is of immediacy, right? When everybody gets the message at the same time, that's tribalizing for McLuhan, right? That breaks us out of our individual private experiences into something that we're all connected with. And I guess if you use the experience of nationalist Germany in the 30s, that was very much enhanced and kind of well understood by the Nazis here, how radio works in that way to create this quite, at that time, quite unprecedented level of mass, what Virilio calls public emotion, immediate mass identification together, or communication. So that is a danger of it. It's now become sublimated into every day. So we have lots of micro tribalities. So if you're on one social network or another, or inside your friend group on a social network, you have a kind of micro tribality where everybody's like connected, the mini immediacies.
I think that's a really interesting point. Just bring back Canada and First Nations for a minute. It's just interesting to note that First Nations people never really had their own radio in Canada. They had television, and so APT and satellite television. So they leapfrogged radio, and it's because radio wasn't cool for the tribal culture.
Yeah, although, yeah, and McLuhan said something about how Canada can jump over modernism, like goes directly from the 18th century to
the 21st and the 21st century.
Because it's a backward backyard country.
Yeah.
No, backwards. Yeah.
Yeah.
He says we're backwards, and he doesn't apologize.
Yeah, and he said that's our advantage.
That's
our advantage because we can identify with the conditions of the new tribalizing world. And of course, as you said, it's not either or. I mean, and as Flusser would always argue, the technology itself is implicitly scientifically generated, and this science is based on linear, alphabetized literacy culture. So there's from now on we don't have we have a retribalizing, but it's not absolute. It'll never be absolute. It'll always be.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. We'll get to the question of identity specifically later, though, or are we on that track now?
Whenever you want.
Okay. Oh, go ahead, please.
No, but I just, your comment reminds me of my experiences in India. I'm in India a lot, and about jumping, right? Technology, levels of technology also. And there, it's of course really fascinating that IT has taken over so much, and really dramatically, in dramatic ways. So even people who are very poor can have a mobile phone, and it works well. As I always say, there's much more IT support in India than plumbing support. And it's really, the technology really kind of crossed over and jumped and leaped, and it really connects people in interesting ways. But what's also fascinating for me is that my father-in-law, my husband is from India, my father-in-law had a phone, used his mobile phone in India, in Calcutta, much more intensively, much faster than I did here in Europe, at that point in the US. And it was because India itself is a very communicative culture, and it's tribal in that sense, very connected, very networked also, because of the political structure also. And so you need to know people, right, to get somewhere. So, and you need to connect. Connection is very important. So that's the best case scenario for a telecommunications company, right? People love to talk, and they need to talk, and so again, I would say it was not really, I would argue, it was not the technology that made Indians more communicative. They were very communicative and very tribal to start with, and that technology just really enhances it in many ways.
Well, that touches a question McLuhan was confronted with in his times, much more than we sometimes can imagine. The whole question of are media at the margins of our life, and do they touch what makes us human in some kind, or are the media at the heart of our life? Again, this is of course a dichotomy metaphor, but McLuhan argued for the perspective that the media are at the heart of our life. And well, when I hear what you just said, I'm not really opposing. And I would assume that McLuhan wouldn't oppose it either. But he sometimes he said some things like being communicative in special cultures or things like that, or the violence as form as a quest for identity. There he said it directly. This is something that has happened or has been in us before, yes, but with the electronic technology it enhances it because of the instantaneousness and so on. So I think it's not a real opposition to McLuhan to say, you know, the technology just enhances what's there. It's both McLuhan and Flusser thought something like that. That McLuhan said we shape the technology, then the technology shape us, and Flusser is talking about some kind of feedback that the media project on us.
Projects from the level of code.
So it's a kind of a feedback loop of the tech. Feedback loop.
No, it's a segue to the feedback video.
Just before we get there, I think it's interesting to note too that you know, when McLuhan went kind of quiet, or when people went quiet on McLuhan in the 80s and late 80s and early 90s. It was about the time when the personal computer really started to diffuse as a common technology. And some of the people who really looked at the advent of personal computing and what it meant to us and to society went down the same kind of rabbit holes that McLuhan had gone. And perhaps maybe in this time they went even a little further. So they would go so far, people like McLuhan and Roseanne Stone and that first wave of cyberspace philosophers who were also artists and architects. I think they were really interested in how the technology, again, is not thing-like and somehow is either outside of us and we can refuse it, or just simply affects us in some sort of topographical way, but that it changes the ground under our feet, as Heim says. So it becomes a deep, and the fancy philosophical word is ontological. It changes the way we are in essence, or at least it works on us. And so McLuhan starts to be recovered in that work in the late 80s and 90s in that wave of literature. But it's deep work too. It's deep philosophical work.
And that's I mean, for me, that's the connection to the topic of self-definition, identity, and, you know, our self-image of being in the world and acting and understanding. So if that all is radically changed by some kind of cluster of new media, I mean, we understand new media is understood as like social media mostly. But McLuhan on purpose calls it electronic media because he thinks it starts with a circuitry and network of electricity. So it's not a phenomenon that is just current right now or for the last 5 years. Now it seems to be like consensus. Media changes not only our everyday life, but maybe our acting in the world. But that's a perspective that he fought for, I think.
And I wonder if that even needs an update to some extent, so that if the essential feature that defines the electric age of circuitry. I'm wondering if it's a little bit different now when people talk about convergence. So circuitry is kind of passive, that's a given, that is our base infrastructure and how we do everything, from banking to email to self-education to whatever. But that the radical change isn't just so much that we're all plugged in, but that we're all plugged into a common digital format in everything we do. And so the idea of convergence and what that means in terms of big data structures and where we find our place now in humanity in the face of this all-encompassing, thoroughly, intensely networked world. In the age of television, it was a small network, let's face it. I mean, you could communicate around the world, but not exactly instantaneously. I mean, there were still lots of film being shipped around and then broadcast on TV. But surely we live in a world in which the planet itself has been thoroughly encephalized. It really is like a neural net. And when something happens, we know about it immediately. It's almost like a common consciousness that we have. And of course, McLuhan talks about that, referring to Heidegger in particular as, that point at which, the machines will eventually do the thinking for us. And that's a fear that we can maybe get to talk about later.
I would like maybe to ask you, I read there is a new type of propulsion. The Chinese discovered a resonance frequency to propulsion for spaceships. So now that we can go outside, it's like, how would you call then, we're out of this global village, we're in the space.
McLuhan has a really nice metaphor he uses about outerings and the phonetic similarity and semantic similarity to the word utterings. And so that he talks about everything that we do and everything we create, everything human creation is a kind of language. And that technology itself is a kind of an outering or an uttering, an expression of human capacity to some extent. I don't know, I think he talks about Sputnik being that pivotal point in 1957 when we saw the planet in a whole new way and suddenly everybody started talking about ecology because they hadn't had a concept of ecology before that. They understood nature, but until they actually saw the planet as a thing out there, people didn't see it as a whole and as an integrated whole, not literally. And so ecology starts to become as an outering or an uttering of a new concept. My argument would be that what you're talking about, and I'm not sure if you're talking about Star Wars type technology where we're going to be going further and further out into space.
Well, at least I see, for example, with the printing press, like the technology expands not only ourselves, like he said, technology is an expansion of ourselves, but also the visual space where to conquer.
Yeah, I see.
Like the printing press,
Creates the public.
we discovered the new world.
Yeah.
Canada is there. And then now with these new technologies, it's like our boundaries are going also further.
So where's our place in this new concept of our environment? Our environment gets expanded, but it starts to take on a larger scope, and that has identity.
Like
Yeah, I think the idea of Sputnik created the Earth as a work of art or something
Yes,
like that.
exactly.
Kind of exteriorized our experience of it and then entering conceptual space.
But is there any concept for that beyond the global village?
Well, what do you mean beyond?
Like, is there anybody developed something else after McLuhan? Maybe.
That takes, that re-updates.
That we after the global village, we re-civilize again with the. I mean, I guess there's just hybrids from now on out for humanity. I guess the cyborg vector, which you were mentioning.
Cyberspace itself is. Cyberspace is an updated version of Global Village, I would argue.
It's still like immediate and imminent.
Yeah, and
Right.
acoustic, ultimately.
Acoustic.
And also this concept of the acoustic space and then the visual space. Now we're in what, tactile? What will you call it?
Perhaps we can let's speak McLuhan on this because our next clip will touch exactly the acoustic and tactile and ritualistic programming thing. So maybe we go into this. This is a clip from the NBC Tomorrow Show with Tom Snyder, where we watched a clip or a cutout for the joint seminar session, which was only for the students taking part in this program. So don't wonder if you not participated. So this is from Tom Snyder, and this is from 1976. So rather participating. Yeah, the first participating one, and then just the next.
I think the first one has both.
1976, McLuhan appeared on NBC's Tomorrow Show with Tom Snyder and delivered another of his famous aphorisms that turned common sense upside down. Charisma means looking like a lot of other people.
At the speed of light, there is no sequence. Everything happens at the same instant. That's acoustic, and everything happens at once. There's no continuity, there's no connection, there's no follow through. It's just all now. And that, by the way, is the way any sport is. Sports tend to be like that. And in terms of the new lingo of the hemispheres, it's all right hemisphere. Games are all right hemisphere. And because they involve the whole man, and they are all participatory, and they're all uncertain. I think that it will really happen. The advantage of coverage of sports events is they are ritualistic. The group gathered there is participating in a ritual. Now the Olympics were even more a group ritual than the ordinary competitive event in a ball game or a single ball game, a single event, because they had a corporate meaning. It was not just a local, it was a sort of a worldwide meaning. And this is itself a ritualistic participation in a large process. Television fosters and favors a world of corporate participation in ritualistic programming. It's not really, that's what I mean when I say it's a cool medium. It's not a hot medium. A hot medium can, like a newspaper, can cover single events, very high intensity. TV is not good at covering single events. It needs a ritual, a rhythm, and a pattern. And that's why a lot of advertising on TV, you see, is too hot, too special, too fragmentary. Doesn't have that ritualistic flow. But the advertisers are aware of this, and they're doing a lot to correct that. But I think that was the great secret of a thing like the Olympics. People had the feeling of participating as a group in a great, meaningful ritual.
But during these rituals, we definitely negotiate identity. We talked about that a lot. There's a concept from communication also called media events. And Katz and Diane wrote that book in their book in the 90s only about these special media events, like rituals, like funerals and big funerals, big royal weddings, etc. And we discussed today in class if you can actually also see terrorist events as media events. And because it also brings us together, right? I mean, there's of course not a happy reason to be together, but it brings us together, and we use that a lot to create an identity and to reassure our identities and to reassure who we are in the world.
On that note, Professor Ferzik, I wonder, what do you make, like his comment there about, TV is not good at single events. Mm-hmm. And I find that ironic, and I would challenge that to some extent, because McLuhan writes Understanding the Media pretty much immediately after the assassination of John F. Kennedy, which was a singularly television event, and really puts TV news itself on the map. It ends radio and newspapers reign in one event. Then when you look at 9/11 as a singular, shared around the world, instantaneous, communicated event, is he wrong about that? Or is he just being McLuhan, where he sometimes says something one way and then will change his mind and say it another way?
I think what's really interesting is that he also brings in the term of flow, and flow is really important for television criticism, television studies. This idea that it's what television is all about is not really watching this or that, but this kind of constant flow of in and out, zapping yourself through information, all of that, and that's actually what has the impact. And I think if you think into his time, at that point, communication scholars did experiments testing like the effect of violent television, let's say, on students. And they would always use just very small clips, short clips of, then see what's the effect, and they couldn't measure any effect, right? And so, but the impact or the way how television works on us is really through this flow, as he also says. And so I would agree that he's right that that's maybe more important than individual events, but
In
at
the
the same
long
time, the staging and the setup and bringing us together and this making it appointment television where we have to be there, that's still to this day, television is the best of all the media.
And I still think there are times when, and not very often thankfully, but during 9/11 in particular, where the world held its breath and collectively witnessed a singularly horrific event.
Right.
And in which there was no particular flow, but a kind of a frozen state.
Absolutely, there was.
And so it's almost like TV going so cold, it literally froze a moment, froze the world for a moment.
It does, but the flowest moment is also there. We talked about that in class also today, because think about it, we have 24-hour television, and there's a lot of space to be filled, but the event itself has happened, so there's nothing there you could show, but you have a lot of space to be filled, and that's where the flow starts. You bring the talking heads, to bring this never-ending repetitive coverage, also like images that
It's
pop
very
in and out.
repetitive,
Yeah.
and that's the interesting thing, that even like what 9/11 was a really good example of that. How you send it, and if you take a look at an important event that happens, whatever it is, check out how many camera angles, how many clips the news shows on every hour. It's the same clips. It's like they sent a huge crew out there. They shot a lot of material, but for some reason you only see the same like 20-second clip or 15-second clip over and over again. If there's a hostage thing, you see a picture of the airport, a picture of this. Actually the quality of the information is still poor.
Yes.
That's one thing that's consistent, and that's what McLuhan considers cold media. Is when you have a very low definition. So even though we have a sense of identity and some kind of experiencing it together, what the content of what we're experiencing is actually very low definition.
Right, because it is ultimately these moments are not about information. If we had the task now to film, to stage, to perform a kidnapping, we could do it, right? We would know how it will look like on television. So it's really not about the information. Or if you would watch the news that McLuhan was referring to, and so news today, they wouldn't look so different, right?
But,
we already have the characters, we have the performers, we have the locations. They don't change a whole lot. This is ultimately not so much about that information. It's much more about the relationship to it.
And I think that also explains why when people saw the second tower go down, they're not quite sure what they saw. They were so cold. It was beyond, it was beyond understanding. I know people who were in New York, saw the tower come down, and they did not understand what they had seen. Couldn't make sense of it.
But I think we're now in a new situation where, like Joy said, here comes everybody. Now we have these cell phones, and everybody's making also news.
But
And
that kind of picture is the same again. That's what's really fascinating for communication scholars. When the citizen journalists came into the picture, there was this big hope that we would have new pictures, new angles, no ways of telling the news. And it's not true. If you compare, and we have studies like that now, if you compare what citizen journalists produce and what actual journalists produce, it's absolutely similar. In fact, there's this imitation going on, right? To make it into the global news stream, you have to produce certain images, and you know it as a consumer, also as a producer, also what kind of images you have to produce to make it. So that's also fascinating, right? That we cannot kind of break that stream of images that is out there.
Doesn't it mean that basically the general level of professional journalists is quite low? If people without special education can produce the same, we can
Don't say that a journalism professional.
Sorry.
Well, it's about the images. You just said it. It's about how do you produce images, or what do you expect from images. And I think for me this is almost the most fascinating thing with McLuhan, that he saw the programming in it. Yeah, like you quoted, advertising advertises advertising. advertising advertises advertising. This is programming how we see or how we, what images do we expect from a news story and so on. So when normal people, not journalist people, take pictures and they are looking the same as the professional people, then it shows this insight that we are programmed. I mean, this is already in our programming. So this, I wanted to come back to the programming thought because you asked about the acoustic catchphrase, and the acoustic, this was in the first clip. The acoustic is meant, this is the idea of everything at the same time. But he combines it with a tactile idea, and I think it shows quite well in this description of the corporate ritualistic programming in sports, because that gave me an insight how corporate can be understood. It's really very physical and sexual, and this is well, at a sports event, I can, this metaphor works for me. I can totally imagine all the people, the atmosphere, and you feel what people feel, and so on. And I was just surprised when you said a single event like the terror attack, this is not like sports. I would agree at the one hand, and on the other hand, I thought when TV covered these kinds of events, we still had, or I had personally, the feeling that I could feel what the others would feel watching the same clips. I mean, this had almost a similar kind of corporate togetherness, I don't know, atmosphere. So I thought this, because we had this discussion about corporate being very physical, but at the same time, of course, reminding us that there are many, you know, private, ökonomische, wirtschaftliche, economic interests, and there are also corporate peer groups he talks about. So there are these two very interesting meanings of participating as a corporate peer group.
Of course, when you're trying to interpret a low resolution, low cool image, you turn inward, and and the involvement happens very physically. You are actually very strongly in McLuhan. Very strongly involved. So there's a corporeality to the interpretation of cool media.
The embodied experience. And I'm wondering if maybe the reason why television is not good at singular events of the kind I'm talking about is that you get instantaneous numbness. I mean, you know, that literally a shocking event. And the same thing happened with the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan, which was done on kind of a low-grade video already, and was so cool an event that it was almost comical in how it unfolded. It even lacked the tragedy of Kennedy for some reason. It was too cold. Whereas Kennedy, with his Zapruder film and everything that came after that, it was a very hot experience in some ways. But I'm wondering if those singular events are so cold that the numbness that McLuhan talks about that has happened to society over time as new media get introduced, it is instantaneous, and so that's why television, we can't do that very often. We don't know how to process that.
Yeah. It's like a reorganizing of the sense ratios, right? So certain new technologies will accentuate some aspect of our sensorium. So nowadays, I think we're like visually very oversaturated, so there's a certain numbness there, and we turn towards acoustics. The sound art is becoming more popular, and other sound-related forms.
Well, now there's an advertising just without sound, and this sticks out.
Yeah.
Out of every advertising. So I think we are already at the phase where, you know, too much, or the whole integration of audio, tactility, and so on has overwhelmed or is consensus in advertising already. So now it's turning like backwards again. So
Going to silent
reduce
films.
it,
Yeah,
reduce
well,
it
the
again.
retrieval of the silent films in the recent
You
Hollywood
get an
film.
Oscar a few years back.
Yeah.
Right?
And another question. Now in the digital, do you still divide like television, radio, and all, or is it one conglomerate in like an amalgam of one digital?
Digital.
Yeah, like
Of course, yeah. Well, McLuhan used the word electronic, not digital. So
There's no real difference. I mean,
I wouldn't say, yeah. But he
Still
wouldn't
electronic.
have used digital.
It's still electronic, but what is new? What makes new media new, or is not the latest gadget or the latest coolest app? It's the fact that everything that we do now shares a common digital format, and so everything can be integrated into a single source. So, and that's just recent. That's within the last 20, 30 years. So, print on paper, film on celluloid, radio by radio waves, all share now common digital formats to the point where, you know, television isn't even broadcast. Well, maybe it is in Germany. It still is in Germany, but in North America, broadcast TV is done. They don't even do it anymore.
It's in
And-
Germany, it's digital.
yeah, no, there's still some over-the-air broadcast. But digital convergence means, well, think of the implications of that. It means, first of all, that you've got a collapsing of the enterprises behind that. Media used to be separate when they were analog, when they had their physical, when they were based in physical media, and they all now share a common, basically non-physical media.
Any other questions?
Oh,
on the-
yeah.
Just to clarify, broadcast media would be like live TV?
Over-the-air TV, you know, the
What
old.
about the news, like daily news, 5 o'clock news, 6 o'clock news?
For radio, or you mean TV news?
Oh, sorry, if we're talking about radio, do you mean like, there's radio stations such as CBC Radio where they'll have their morning programs, those are all live, aren't they?
Yes, and those, I think radio is still, most radio is over the air in Canada still, I believe, but television has been, over the air television has been phased out.
So it's not about content at all. We are only talking about transmission. How is the content actually transmitted to
Yeah.
your household?
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
The
distributed.
mediums themselves.
Yeah.
But that's the interesting thing about McLuhan, how these invisible things affect us also. That's what I find so fascinating. And I also read in Norway, I think, they turn off the FM.
Or they've canceled.
So,
But that doesn't mean that like cables are not, you know, there's not centralization. There's not, the concept of broadcast is
Right.
not done for. Still like everybody's getting the same message from centralized servers, centralized resources.
But keep in mind, just because, at least I would argue, just because we have a new form of transmission or distribution doesn't really change the practices of the medium a whole lot. So we still have 3-minute songs or 2-minute songs because that's what fit on a single, right, on a record, and there's no reason for it anymore, but it's still there. So it's really, I think we shouldn't overlook how the organizations and the structures and the practices within these organizations are firm and stay the same.
But
no
what
matter
it-
what's distributed.
I agree, but what it does mean is that, and McLuhan, you know, he anticipates this well in his work, where he even talks, he even uses says out loud that, you know, we're already in the age where, you know, where the consumers will become the producers. And so he didn't have the word prosumer to deal with, but he's already talking about that flip, or that reversal of consumption, where the consumer becomes the producer. And digital convergence, that everything being in a common digital format means anybody can take a video and do a mashup with music and do an art treatment on it and create something new that didn't exist before. And that's what's breaking the rules of media ownership and consumption.
But I think I would argue that's really the most fascinating aspect about McLuhan, that he did explain our digital culture very well. But I think, but when we hear arguments, okay, what's different now than, let's say, 30 years ago? The arguments are very similar to what McLuhan says to what was 30 years before him. So, you know, he explained broadcasting, he explained radio and television. But it seems now we make an argument for that the digital culture does all of that, global village, etc., but the broadcasting age used to be where everything was fine. That's the nostalgic place where we, as a nation in front of the TV, everything was happy. So it's fascinating, right? That he was really ahead of his time.
I agree. Yeah.